Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at the news from March 2nd, 2025, pulling insights from sources like the New York Times, Inside Climate News, and NPR. Two big themes kind of jumped out at us. The first is the ongoing impact of the Trump administration's environmental policies, and then also just how climate change is becoming impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing the consequences play out in real time, from policy decisions that were made years ago to like the environmental shifts that are happening like right now.
Absolutely. So let's start with those protests at national parks. The LA Times is painting this really vivid picture, with off-duty rangers and local communities are rallying against these staffing cuts, specifically at Joshua Tree in the Santa Monica Mountains. And what makes this even more impactful, I think, is the timing of it. They're protesting during peak wildflower season.
Yeah, it's a brilliant strategy. Wildflower season brings in huge crowds. So these protests aren't just about budget cuts, they're a visual reminder of what's at stake. Which is, the ability of parks to function, to protect these natural wonders, and to provide like the visitor experience that people expect.
Yeah, they're not going to be seeing those wildflowers if nobody is there to, make sure that those parks are running.
Exactly.
And it's not just the parks feeling the squeeze. The New York Times is reporting on this wave of resignations and potential illegal firings at NOAA and the National Weather Service.
Yeah, the potential consequences here are huge. Meteorologists are outright saying that these cuts endanger lives, especially when severe weather hits. We depend on these agencies for accurate forecasts and warnings, and like dismantling them leaves us incredibly vulnerable.
It's easy to forget how crucial those agencies are until a major storm hits.
Exactly.
And then you're like, oh,
right.
Where's my warning?
Where's my data?
Yeah.
Right.
And these stories about cuts to environmental agencies kind of point to, I think, a broader trend. The Trump administration's systematic efforts to unravel climate policy. Inside Climate News is reporting that the EPA is actually trying to eliminate the very foundation for regulating greenhouse gas pollution.
Wow.
So this is where things get really interesting, I think. NPR is highlighting how oil companies are doubling down on fossil fuels. And this comes after years of those same companies touting their move towards green energy.
Yeah.
So is this a coincidence or a calculated response to relaxed regulations?
Well, we can't definitively say for sure, but it definitely raises this like crucial question
Yeah.
about how government policies influence corporate actions. When regulations ease companies might revert back to practices. That boosts short-term profits, even if it harms the environment in the long run.
It feels like a short-sighted strategy. That's going to have lasting implications. And while we're on the topic of policy, the Citizens Climate Lobby is sounding the alarm about protecting the Inflation Reduction Act, which could be undermined by a recent House budget resolution. They're basically saying we can't afford to lose the progress that was made.
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, was like a monumental step in climate policy. Any attempt to weaken or repeal it is a step backwards, potentially jeopardizing our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly.
Yeah, I mean, these are all kind of policy battles and these budget cuts. But meanwhile, climate change effects are becoming undeniable, like the California wildfires are a prime example of that. The New York Times is sharing this heartbreaking story about children being forced to flee these fires and having to choose what few possessions they could carry. It really humanizes the devastation and brings home like the real cost of these disasters.
It's a stark reminder of the human whole, for sure. But amidst the devastation, I think there's also an opportunity to rebuild smarter. Inside Climate News emphasizes the need for climate-resilient infrastructure. So, we need structures that can withstand future events, not just like replicate what was lost.
It's about learning from these events and adapting our approach to building.
Precisely.
Yeah. And, even something as seemingly simple as the wildflower blooms in Southern California are being affected. The LA Times is reporting that the lack of rain this year could significantly impact those blooms, which are a major draw for tourists and locals alike.
Right. It's a subtle but significant sign that climate change is touching even the smallest details of our lives.
It is. It is.
These seemingly minor changes can have this ripple effect, impacting tourism, local economies, and even our connection to the places that we call home.
Absolutely. And this brings us to Alaska. There's this concerning development in Alaska, a potential spending freeze that could cripple volcano monitoring systems. The New York Times is highlighting the danger of cutting funding for these programs, especially with Mount Edgecombe showing signs of activity.
Yeah, it seems like every corner of the country is grappling with the consequences of climate change at this point.
It does, doesn't it?
And these events are interconnected in ways that we might not immediately realize. Volcanic eruptions are natural events, but climate change can amplify their impact by altering weather patterns and increasing the risk of secondary disasters like landslides and floods.
We need to see those connections and understand how a change in one area can trigger this cascade of effects.
Absolutely. And investing in preparedness and early warning systems is crucial to mitigate those risks both now and in the future.
For sure. Speaking of volcanoes, the New York Times has this captivating piece about a Vesuvius victim whose brain was vitrified, so basically turned to glass by the eruption's intense heat.
Wow, that's incredible and terrifying at the same time. It really underscores the sheer power of these events and the devastation they can cause.
It does.
It forces you to confront the raw power of nature and recognize that even ancient history offers valuable lessons about the potential consequences of natural disasters.
Yeah.
And while volcanic eruptions are natural events, climate change could potentially increase their frequency and intensity, making those lessons even more relevant today.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like we're constantly bombarded with, this news about environmental crises
hmm
and policy battles. Like, where do we even begin to address these, complex issues?
I know it can feel overwhelming, but it's important to remember that awareness is the first step towards action. And these news stories, while they're concerning, I think they also highlight opportunities for positive change.
So instead of getting bogged down by, the doom and gloom, let's focus on those opportunities for a bit. Like, what can we learn from these stories, and how can we, translate that knowledge into action?
Yeah, for example, those protests at national parks. I think those demonstrate the power of collective action. These rangers and community members are raising awareness, putting pressure on decision makers, and advocating for the protection of, our shared natural heritage.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see people just taking a stand and demanding better for our planet.
Exactly. And their actions can serve as a blueprint for how we can get involved in our own communities, whether it's through contacting our elected officials, supporting environmental organizations, or participating in local initiatives. We can all make a difference.
And it's not just about these grand gestures. Sometimes, the most impactful changes start with small individual actions, like reducing our own carbon footprint, making conscious consumer choices, or simply, educating ourselves about the issues at hand.
Absolutely. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to a larger collective effort. And speaking of collective efforts, the New York Times is reporting on a significant development in France, a ban on PFAS, which are often called forever chemicals. In many products,
That's a huge step, considering the health risks associated with those chemicals. But why the controversy over cookware?
yeah, the cookware industry actually lobbied really hard against the ban, arguing that PFAS are essential for nonstick properties and that there are no viable alternatives. So the French government ultimately exempted cookware, which has sparked a lot of debate about balancing public health with economic interests.
Yeah, it's a tough call, for sure. But it raises important questions about the responsibility of industries to prioritize consumer safety and the role of governments in regulating potentially harmful substances.
Right, and it also highlights the need for continued research and development of safer alternatives. As consumers become more aware of the risks associated with PFAS, the demand for safer products will hopefully drive innovation in this area.
And speaking of scientific advancements, the Climate Change Dispatch is reporting on research suggesting that ocean currents are actually stable, which contradicts earlier claims of an impending collapse.
This research is fascinating because it challenges that narrative of irreversible tipping points in climate change. Ocean currents are vital to regulating global climate, so any changes to their stability could have, significant consequences. This new research injects a note of caution into the conversation, reminding us that the science is constantly evolving, and we need to be open to new evidence.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we shouldn't jump to conclusions based on preliminary findings. Rigorous scientific inquiry is essential for understanding the complexities of climate change and informing effective solutions.
However, this research shouldn't be misinterpreted as a sign that we can, relax our efforts to mitigate climate change. It's one piece of a complex puzzle, and the overwhelming consensus within the scientific community remains that human activities are driving climate change.
We can't afford to be complacent. And on that note, the Climate Change Dispatch is also reporting on an FBI investigation into the Biden EPA's $20 billion Green Fund, alleging fraud and political cronyism in the distribution of funds.
This investigation underscores the importance of transparency and accountability in government programs, especially those that are aimed at addressing climate change. Public trust is essential for the success of these initiatives.
It's a reminder that even with the best intentions, there's always a risk of mismanagement and corruption. Oversight and scrutiny are crucial, to ensure that funds are being used effectively and ethically.
Absolutely. And these investigations often spark debate about the role of government in addressing climate change. Some argue for a more market-based approach, while others advocate for stronger regulations and government intervention.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But one thing's clear, the stakes are incredibly high, and we need to find solutions that are both effective and equitable. And speaking of policy decisions, the House of Representatives passed a budget resolution that could impact the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, this development is concerning, as the IRA has been hailed as like a major step forward in climate policy. Any attempts to weaken it could have significant consequences for our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to a clean energy economy.
The Citizens Climate Lobby is urging its members to contact their representatives and advocate for the IRA's protection. They emphasize the need to maintain the momentum we've gained in addressing climate change.
Yeah, it's a call to action for all of us to engage in the political process and hold our elected officials accountable for making decisions that prioritize a sustainable future. We can't afford to be passive bystanders. Our voices and our votes matter.
And it's not just about national politics. The LA Times reminds us of the power of grassroots activism with their coverage of the protests at national parks. These protests organized by off-duty rangers and community members shows that even on a local level, we can make a difference.
Absolutely. These individuals are standing up for what they believe in, protecting our shared natural heritage, and inspiring others to get involved. It's a powerful reminder that collective action can drive change, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem.
It's about recognizing that we all have a stake in the future of our planet, and that our actions, both big and small, can contribute to a more sustainable and just world. So as we navigate these complex and interconnected issues, let's remember the power of collective action, the importance of holding our leaders accountable, and the need to stay informed and engaged.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale and complexity of these challenges, but it's important to remember that we're not alone in this fight. There are countless individuals, organizations, and communities around the world working tirelessly to create a more sustainable and just future.
And that kind of brings us back to you, the listener. How do these stories, these glimpses into the state of our planet and the decisions being made, how do these change how you think about your own role in all this?
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves regularly. We can't afford to be passive observers. We each have a responsibility to stay informed, to engage in meaningful conversations, and to take action, however small it may seem.
Yeah, there's power in individual choices. Whether it's reducing our own carbon footprint, supporting businesses that align with our values, or simply talking to friends and family about these issues, every action contributes to a larger shift in awareness and behavior.
Absolutely. It's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. We all have different skills, resources, and passions. Find what resonates with you and use it to create positive change.
The future hinges on the choices that we make today. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better world. This daily dive into the news is just a starting point. There's a whole ocean of information and action out there waiting to be explored.
And remember, the most important step you can take is the next one. So find your footing, find your voice, and step forward. The planet needs all of us now more than ever.